Well, a very warm welcome to everybody tuning in today. I thank you very much for your interest, and I hope to make this a well worthwhile event. What we'll be looking at, we all know that technology is advancing and doing so exponentially, but some technologies are being accelerated due to the influence of COVID. And this presentation will look at what some of those are anyway, the main ones. And then following that, we'll look at how COVID has changed the way we live, how society has been impacted. And I'll finish up with a brief discussion about some of the new business models that this disruptive technology is making possible, and which we are seeing coming along now, and which I believe will become much more prevalent in the years to come. So without further ado, let's dive in and take a look at the first slide. So we're looking at how COVID is boosting technology. Well, probably the most obvious one, I think, is that ultra-fast networks are becoming established, and the various technologies in the cloud and on the web rely on this speed. So 5G is already being rolled out, and it's being rolled out with even more urgency now because there is more requirement for high bandwidth. I think we've all noticed that the internet is quite a bit slower at the moment with more people using it. So there is a need for more speed, more capacity there. The impact of that over time will be that more and more cloud-based technologies will come online, facilitating access to artificial intelligence on demand. So 5G rollout is really the thing that we're observing quite quickly now. One of the technologies that depends on this is, of course, augmented reality. And there is tremendous potential in all sorts of fields, one of which would be education. I mean, as a university, we see great potential in using AR to basically train not just doctors, as you see here, but really any sort of procedural learning that would benefit from having information overlaid over the top of like this. So training, education, also in tourism would be another good one. This is Hohenzollern Castle, south of Stuttgart in Germany. And well, it's currently closed, just like most other things are at the moment. But if it's not possible yet, it will be possible soon to basically go through tourist attractions like this particular one, and the other one down near Munich, Neuschwanstein Castle, which was the model for the Walt Disney Castle in Los Angeles. So basically, any far distant place can be digitized in high res and used as either augmented reality or virtual reality, full immersion. Now, of course, what you see here is something which is to do with games, and computer games are tremendously important in today's world. Not everybody takes them very seriously, but they are a really big deal these days, and I can definitely see that the games that are coming along, like the next PlayStation or the one after that, will offer really high definition, full immersion I think the current one already does. Now, that's going to open up possibilities for video conferencing too, of course. There will be plenty of occasions, I think, where people are going to choose to meet each other in virtual reality and avoid the necessity to travel, take hours or days out of their schedule and, travel somewhere in a plane, stay somewhere in a hotel. If you can have a realistic experience with other people, then the imperative to actually meet face to face will lessen. Now, that's not going to replace everything, I realise, but it's going to, I think, decrease the amount of travel that people are prepared to do. Incidentally, to be realistic, if you can look into a person's eyes, if you can see their eyes and they can see yours, and you're getting a face-to-face experience like that, looking at someone, then that psychologically is what gives a person the sense that they've had a satisfactory meeting with someone. So in the early days of video conferencing, that wasn't possible. It was pretty blurry, and the frame rate wasn't terrific, and you couldn't see a great deal of detail. But things have improved a great deal. Faster networks is contributing to that. Next, we have the whole idea of the quantified self, which, it's basically wearable medical technology that monitors your vital signs, all sorts of vital signs, not just your heart rate, but your blood pressure and, how far you've walked in a day, and, a great number of different biofeedbacks. Now, this technology, I realise, has been around for quite a while, but it has really improved of late. And, what's really spurred it with COVID is that, a person with the virus is going to have elevated temperature. So a wearable device that tells you what your temperature is something that is going to be really very useful. For diabetics particularly, there are now wearable blood glucose monitors and things like this. So it will work very well as a preventative medical procedure, but also as a preventative or proactive health management. If a person gets into the habit of monitoring their vitals, they very easily can pick up problems before they become problems. And of course, the data that is collected from this might be of use to the medical professional who you consult. So this is a very rapidly evolving technology in the world today. Linked to the idea of medical technology, we have artificial intelligence in the whole area of drug discovery and vaccine development. Now, it's so promising, the use of AI in this area. I heard one report that basically said in the US, the FDA basically expect things to take about 10 years, a drug, before it is first thought of until it reaches the market. It takes about 10 years and costs several billion dollars, and most of them don't. I'm not sure what the proportion is. It might only be 1 in 10 that actually makes it. But with AI, it can do modelling and rapid prototyping, and it can tell within a short time whether something is going to be viable, and it might shorten the lead time from 10 years down to 6 months. Now, I've been reading that vaccine development is benefiting from this particular technology. So, we've heard estimates that it's going to be at least a year before we have a vaccine. I'd very much doubt that. I think we're going to see it quite a bit sooner than that, through the Agency of medical AI. Next, we have data science, basically the big data or the huge amount of data that is collected by devices such as your smartphone and those medical devices that I just mentioned. And that information, while there are privacy concerns, if the data is anonymized, there is a lot of benefit that can come from crunching the data to give really quite accurate information about the spread of diseases, about the the pace at which it moves from place to place, where it's being concentrated, and so on. So all of that data, while it's a little problematic from a privacy point of view, that is a manageable problem, and there is a lot of potential here. And well, all of us will have heard that the COVID Safe app is now available for download, and you know, I downloaded it myself this morning, and it's installed, and I saw that well over 2 million people have already downloaded this app out of a country of 26 odd million. And, you know, people are, I think, seeing the benefit, the potential benefit of these sorts of technologies. Next, we have additive technology or additive manufacturing, another name for 3D printing. 3D printing is a revolution that has been coming for some years, but boy, oh boy, it's really sped up in recent times. Why has it? Well, because obtaining parts for equipment in these times can be a problem. There was a report of in Italy, particularly hard hit area. In Italy, some guys managed to 3D print a part for a ventilator that they were able to do for €1 or €2 per piece. And these were working components that did the job. And if they were to buy that from the manufacturer, always assuming they could get it in a reasonable time frame, it would have cost them $10,000 to buy that same part. So talk about disrupting, you know, profiteering models. There is a lot of potential in additive manufacturing, and we expect great things from that. One of the things it does do also is that it refocuses onto the local, you know, so supply chains, which are long and vulnerable. If the manufacturing country is in lockdown, then supply is going to be a problem. If you can make something locally, well, that's got to be a good thing, and that has really sort of brought it back to the community level. So not everybody would need to have a 3D printer necessarily. I can see community or neighbourhood level print centres where, you know, a larger, faster printer is, and if you have the print file that you've downloaded from the internet, then you can basically take it there and print it out at short notice. Next, we can mention about basically how do we trust what we see and hear on the internet? Well, blockchain offers a great deal of potential in this regard. We do need ways to verify that something is true and to know when it's false. Now, the picture here shows Bitcoin, and that's probably the most well-known cryptocurrency, but it's much broader than just how do you anonymize financial transactions. It's really every aspect of what we do, either in business and in the consumption of media. We do need to know what is true and what is not. So those are just some of the current technologies that, yes, they all exist. I'd be surprised if any of those technologies surprised anyone, but each of them has received a bit of a boost as a result of the COVID-19, which is kind of remarkable in a way because, you know, the pace of disruption has been going pretty fast already. One of the things I didn't make a lot of in that previous segment was artificial intelligence. It is finding its way into all sorts of other technologies as well, but you know, I mentioned it in the context of drug discovery. Okay, so how has it changed the way we live? What effects has it had on society? Now, this is not a totally different topic, because technology and society are very closely linked. Technology has always impacted on society, and society has always influenced the direction that technology develops. So looking at the straight technology as we just did, and then focusing on what you know, what sort of social changes have come about is also very interesting to look at. And the first one to mention about this is how we have basically, when faced with a common enemy, collectively we unite to find a solution. National governments are still pursuing national agendas. Yes, that's true. But if you look at the scientific level, there's been wonderful collaboration between scientists all around the world. Thousands and thousands of medical researchers are looking at either developing a vaccine or researching some way of disrupting this particular virus. So it's brought people together, and the technologies that we mentioned in the previous section have certainly facilitated that. You know, being able to collaborate using teleconferencing technology plus other ways that they're doing this. It has created a global response. It would be hard to find anyone anywhere on the face of the planet who hasn't heard of coronavirus or COVID-19 by now. But you know, it is a truly global phenomenon, and it has created more of a global consciousness. Now, globalism and internationalism is a political sort of hot potato at the moment. One side of politics likes the idea and the other side doesn't like the idea. The other side prefers a more national approach. Now, I can see that there is room for both of these, and that to meet in the middle will be the way to go. We still need sort of coordinated national responses to things, but you know, the global response is an excellent thing. It's making people more self-sufficient. You know, you make, you reuse, you make do, you repurpose. If you're home, if you're self-quarantined, then to be resourceful and self-sufficient is really something that I think a lot of people have been doing. No blind trust. Well, I'm referring to the fact that as well-intentioned as leaders are, as governments are, they don't always get it right, do they? I mean, with an unprecedented event like this, well, yes, we have had pandemics before, but this is the first one where there's been such a radical lockdown, etc. Some governments have responded by not responding, and other governments at the other end of the scale are basically, you know, making everybody stay at home, and everything in between. So the playbook is still being written, and you know, whilst I'm not being cynical about governments, I think they do the best they can, but you know, they might make the wrong decision and people might die as a result of that decision. So, you know, that feeds back into the self-sufficiency. You make up your own mind. I mentioned before that less travel is likely to be the result of the improvement of technologies like Zoom and Skype and Teams, less travel. People will still want to travel to places where they want to go because the experience of being there is worth the effort. But if it's just to go to a meeting for a couple of hours, then yeah, better to use telepresence for that, and the technology is really maturing for telepresence all the time. Now, one industry of that will be really quite heavily impacted is the airline industry. When all the restrictions are lifted, I'm pretty sure that the numbers of people travelling will diminish. I don't think we'll see airlines like Qantas or any of the other, top tier type airlines go under, but I think there will be a slimming down of the aviation industry. That's a fairly safe bet, I think. Another technology or another change to the way we live is our reliance on robots to do various things for us. And one of the types of robots is delivery type robots or disinfecting type robots. Previously, robots were either categorized as autonomous weapons, they were dangerous, violent things, or they were, they were toys or something recreational. But this change means that robots, including drones, are being, repurposed for really quite serious purposes, and contactless delivery is just one of the areas. So if COVID hadn't happened, then we still would be seeing a growth in the use of robots of one kind or another, but we're seeing an accelerated use of them now. Another area is doing more with less. It sort of goes back to that self-sufficiency idea in a way, but if you can't get to the shops every day and you have to make do with what you've got, then yeah, you are going to make do with less, and you can do more with less because you can repurpose. And that's a fairly natural sort of response. And our consumer society encourages us to buy stuff, and I think most people's homes are possibly a little bit cluttered with a lot of this stuff just sitting around. And I saw a report in the media that one of the surprising products that Woolworths and Coles are reporting much greater sales of are cleaning products. So people, when they're home, self-quarantining, yes, they're also baking cakes. That was another one that was right up. But I guess they look around and see things that need cleaning. And whilst they're cleaning, they might see things to declutter. And all of that might give a person a sense of, well, new priorities. What's actually important in my life? I thought these things were important in my life. I thought being really, really busy was important in my life. But now I can see maybe I could do with simplifying things and maybe cutting out a few of those things that I was doing before, but wasn't really doing me much good. And in fact, I remember a business coach telling me once that 80% of your results come from 20% of your efforts, and you should search your daily activities, look critically at them and identify which of those activities contribute to the 20% and cut them out, and do more of the 20% that you are getting most of your results out of. And I think that's one of the consequences of making do with less. Another area that's really had a big boost is sustainable energy. We know that that's solar and wind and various other forms, including fusion energy, which isn't quite with us yet, but things are looking reasonably promising there. The thing about the sustainable energy is that with less going on in our lives and more reliance, well, what I mean to say here is that energy shortages hasn't actually been a problem yet, but it would be naive to think that areas would not be impacted eventually by energy shortages. And it really just depends on where you were when the shutters came down and where you found yourself stuck. To have locally produced sustainable energy is obviously a useful thing. Nuclear fusion, for those who don't know, fusion is a new form of nuclear energy. Well, it's been around a while, but it's basically clean. The only output from it is completely harmless, as being water. It produces no radioactive waste. And there are a number of quite advanced projects looking at fusion. I was reading about one in the US, Lockheed Martin was, they have got something now that is working. When it will appear on the market, commercialised, is another matter. Solar and battery, when you can have solar panels on your roof, preferably ones that look like roof tiles, and a battery bolted to the side of your house that stores that energy, then each of us becomes more or less self-sufficient. And you might even have an electric car that is parked in the garage and is charging itself up off that power. Next, looking at this issue of emergency preparedness, as I mentioned, we don't have a playbook for this, so governments haven't really known what to do. Every government should come out of this being better prepared, because as Bill Gates observed, every 10 or 15 years, we can expect to have a pandemic. This won't be the last one. So we need to know how best to go about this, and that's the business of preparing and managing a disaster, and really becoming more aware of what the actual existential threats are. Things like pandemics. Most of the existential threats we hear about are AI that is out to get us, or asteroids about to smack into the Earth. But these are all threats to our existence. But we can put it more into perspective now. So we ask ourselves, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and we need to know, what's real, what's true, who can I trust? Now, social media has had trustworthy badges for some time, after elections in the past few years, but I believe some of them have stepped up their efforts so that people who tweet things, for example, can be seen as a trusted resource, and this sort of system will also be seen in other social media. And in the end, really, if we are acting local and thinking globally, but we also get to spend time with the people who matter the most to us. I must admit, working from home myself, I've had a chance to spend a lot more time with my family, and I'm very, very glad to have done that. So, that sort of quality time has been a, unexpected bonus. Final point in this section is that of universal basic income. Now, this is a real hot potato of a topic. Basically, if you don't know the concept, it's giving everybody, regardless of their regardless, an income of about $1,000 a month. And basically with that, they stay above the poverty line. They can pay some rent, they can support themselves. It allows people to escape the casual trap of casual employment, where they might get a week or two here, a couple of weeks off, a couple more weeks on, week off. They're not off long enough to get Social Security. Now, the model, how we afford it is obviously the big question. And, you know, the optimists out there think that with improved automation, technology, that more wealth will be created as a result, and this will allow universal basic income. You know, I'm still thinking about it. I'm not quite sure how it would be paid for, but there are economists out there who say that it is a doable thing. So just mentioning it, it's already being tested in a number of places and with fairly promising results. And so to finish up this presentation, I'd like to just now look at some of the emerging business models that are allowed for now with the technology that we currently have. And folks, this is really the exciting thing. Like electricity 100 years ago, it found its way into 1,000 different objects that were previously not electrified, and it made them into useful labour-saving devices. You know, a refrigerator, a washing machine, a water pump. There's hundreds of examples. This technology of high bandwidth 5G, AI in the cloud on demand is going to mean that the Internet of Things will expand exponentially. AI will find its way into all sorts of objects, and this is a whole area of new employment, just as electrifying everyday objects was a new industry 100 years ago. You know, lots of new companies sprung up, like General Electric, you know, little companies like that. Big companies, Westinghouse, they all got going back in those earlier times, and we'll see this happen with the Internet of Things and the AI embedding into objects. So with that technology, looking first at a couple of these, and I'll move through them fairly quickly. First one, the crowd economy. Now, there are millions and billions of people out there, and there are some things that the crowd is good at predicting, other things that they're not terribly good at predicting. But if you know what they are good at predicting, then they can be used as a really good resource. But in terms of this business model, I'm talking here about not using full-time employees, but using people on platforms like Upwork that are qualified, and they live in places where their cost of living is quite low. And, you know, they can be employed as required for a very specific purpose or for an ongoing purpose. And, you know, that crowd economy is making new businesses very much more affordable and feasible. So entrepreneurs with a good idea can get going with that idea without a lot of seed capital. You know, the barriers to entry have never been lower. The next one would be the free data, free or data economy, and that already exists with platforms like Google and Facebook and Twitter. You know, it's free to use, but the data that you input yourself, say with Facebook or with Google, you know, it knows what you're interested in, and that information is valuable. Data is the new oil, as they say, in the new economies. So, you know, it's questionable. Some people question whether or not that's an ethical way to to conduct business. But if they're upfront about the arrangement, then, you know, arguably it is ethical. I think we'll see more of this sort of model. You know, people just have to be prepared for their data to be owned by someone other than themselves. I mentioned before, just now, about how AI will find its way, embed itself into the Internet of Things. I see that as being one of the most vibrant, sort of buoyant industry opportunities of any of these, the smartness economy. So it's really just limited by the ingenuity and the vision and the creativity of entrepreneurs. You know, I often get asked whether or not people's jobs are secure, and I say, well, will AI take my job, they say. And I said, well, it'll take some jobs, but it'll create others. And people say, well, what jobs? And the problem is we don't know what those jobs are. They haven't been thought of yet. But, you know, I've heard it said, if you asked a farmer 100 years ago, if you told the farmer that, well, 90+% of people in the country live and work on farms, but in 100 years, only 2% of people will be living on farms. And they'll say, really? And what will all those people be doing? And if they were told, well, they'll be web developers and finance brokers and yoga instructors, you know, well, you know, it's just unbelievable. So we don't really know what it is until it's invented. But the smartness economy is really going to be huge. Decentralized autonomous organizations, fantastic idea. You know, you basically set up a virtual business that runs on autopilot. You set it up to be automated. Such businesses, they operate 24/7, 365 days a year. And the hardest, really, I guess the hardest part about it is dreaming up the algorithms and making them comprehensive enough. The technology to do this already exists. And there are a number of organisations around that operate more or less autonomously. I read about the energy drink Red Bull. It's only got a few employees, but they've got a lot of subcontractors out there. So I think, you know, again, it links into that crowdsourcing idea that if you've got a really clever idea, you can set up a business and make it work without needing a whole lot of capital. And you can do it from pretty much anywhere, provided you have, you know, reasonable internet connectivity. Nearly towards the end here, the closed loop economy, which is otherwise known as a circular economy, basically is all about reusing, recycling, sharing, repairing, refurbishing, remanufacturing things that, you know, instead of throwing them away and them finding their way into landfill, they get repurposed. Now, it might be for another reason, you know, tyres, automobile tyres might be repurposed to be flip-flop thongs for people, you know, that last a long, long time. Who knows? You know, there's any number of ways that you can recycle things. So I think we'll see more closed loop economies. We will see much more virtual reality, augmented reality coming along. People will spend more and more time in those realities. And, you know, there'll be multiple worlds that people like to inhabit. Now, this rings alarm bells for some in society. They say, oh, yes, you know, my kids are already spending too much time online, etc. You know, the overuse of something should not in itself prohibit the use of it. Basically, people need to be taught and need to develop enough self-discipline so that it doesn't become an addiction, it doesn't become a problem in their life. There are many social benefits for these sorts of technologies. So people will have their everyday life in the physical world, but they'll also have their online lives. And people already have their online lives, but it'll be more enriched. It'll be bigger because they'll be immersed. The transformation economy is the next one to look at, and that transformation economy is really, so it used to be that, well, the example here is Starbucks. You know, you used to just go to Starbucks, get a cup of coffee, but these days the experience of being in the store is one of much more than just having coffee. It's a lifestyle experience. It's a chance to converse with others. It's a chance to experience things that you wouldn't experience anywhere else. In one way or another, these transformational businesses give people experiences that they do find transformational. Now, it's hard to be a bit more specific about that, but it's an impressive experience that changes you. And again, what these look like is a matter of ingenuity and creativity of the people concerned. So that's been the whistle stop tour. There's really so much in this whole topic, folks, that I would love to spend a bit more time talking about it. But I mean, that's a whistle stop tour of what I see happening around us and what I see coming ahead of us. And at that, I will hand it over to questions and answers, if you have any. Okay, now I'm just going to go back to here. Okay, blockchain is not accepted by the community. It becomes hard to trust. How do we get buy-in? Yes, blockchain has got a number of problems, that being one of them. It's associated with nefarious, dark web type applications. But the finance industry, the banking industry, there is a lot of interest from these legitimate businesses and others in finding ways to get ahead of it, because they can see what's coming. They can see that blockchain is here's a big word, a disintermediating technology. It's going to cut out the middlemen and make people able to do peer-to-peer transactions, and I think the banks are really trying to look at doing that. The other, to find a way to incorporate it into their business. The other one, very quickly, about blockchain is that it is very, it can be very energy intensive. It can consume a lot of electricity. Okay, next question. I think the comments you make on new priorities and potential shifts. However, do you think that these are temporary shifts due to the current economic climate? For example, less travel while we have less discretionary income. However, this will likely increase as the economy recovers. That's a good one. I see basically that all of these trends were already happening, but some of them have been expedited or accelerated through necessity. And the obvious example there would be with Zoom and Skype and Teams. All of these platforms have really been improved, particularly Zoom, because of the Zoom bombing issue. But to mention about, well, will travel go back to? I don't think it will. I think it'll go back to some extent, but I don't think it'll go all the way back, because travel is expensive and people were in the habit of doing it. And after a couple of months of not traveling and having meetings online, if those meetings went well, then, people, I think, are going to think twice about spending the money. But of course, people are also still always going to want to go on holidays places. There will be plenty of people who want to travel. So, yeah, I think the airline industry is safe, but I just somehow don't think that as many people are going to be traveling in the future. Hang on a second. I'm just moving that so that I can read the next one. David, thanks for your presentation. How do you see developing countries? How do you see developing countries coping with the technology gap? Our reality in Australia is different to places in Africa, Latin America, and so on. That's very true. The developing world, there is quite a gap. The big tech giants recognise this for business reasons, if nothing else, if not humanitarian, by each of them instituting their own pervasive internet connectivity coverage. So Google have these balloons floating around. Others are putting up constellations of satellites. There's, by the end of it, and it's already happening, by the end of it, all of Africa, all of Latin America, anywhere and everywhere in the world will have not just internet access, but 5G speed access, gigabit access. And for the cost of a smartphone, which you can get in some places for the equivalent of 5 or 10 Australian dollars, I realise that's still quite a lot of money for some, but I think the uptake, I think it's going to make this technology accessible to most, if not everybody. So yes, there is a bit of a gap at the moment, but that gap is pretty rapidly closing. Okay, are there any other questions? Interesting points about where technology and generally our lives may be going. Do you see certain technologies or other factors being made obsolete due to what is happening right now? Interesting area for me is how we can now embrace change in our office space and work sites to help drive efficiency while increasing creativity and innovation. Yes, I think some technologies will become redundant more quickly as other technologies come into wider implementation. Trying to think of some examples of that. I mean, apart from the teleconferencing example that I've relied heavily upon already, but that's probably the one that most of us are most familiar with as we work from home. Yes, I think that, well, for example, I think that with autonomous vehicles of all sorts, that's cars, trucks, ships, even aeroplanes, I think we're going to see a fairly rapid move towards full autonomy on that. I think we'll see a move towards transport as a service, that model coming in, so that instead of us buying a car for $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 and having it sit in the garage 90% of the time, we can use an app on our phone, which basically gets a little autonomous electric car around to the front door in 5 minutes to take us where we want to go for not very much money, because there's not a human driver. Well, that's pretty bad news for all those Uber drivers out there and all those taxi drivers. Yes, it's it's definitely going to impact on them, but it's much cheaper and people will start using it. It's a bit like how horses, 100 years ago, horses gave way within about 10 years, almost completely, the switch over to cars, the Model T Ford. So yeah, I think we will see rapid obsolescence of some technologies. Yeah. Next question. The JobKeeper could be seen as a mini UBI experiment. Yes, that you could see it that way. As small businesses are trying to reopen, we're hearing more and more about people on JobKeeper who are refusing to return to work. Do I think that the UBI will change the work ethic and affect the future workforce? Yeah, that's a really big question. It's a bit of a hard one to answer. We're not quite sure how it's going to affect people, but I do recall reading Rutger Bregman's book on this, which is very interesting. He basically says that, yes, there will be some people who choose not to work, but the majority of people will still want to work, and they will work at their job, their current job if they've got one, or something that they like to do, or they might volunteer in the local community. And in the book I read by Rutger Bregman, Dutch sociologist, he said, the crime in communities goes down. So there aren't as many people in prison. And if you've got every prisoner costing $50,000 a year, that's $1,000 a week that they're saving. There's less hospitalisation because people are healthier. They're looking after their health better. There's a whole range of sort of related benefits. But on the question of will people want to work, yes, people will want to work. Some people, the people who do want to work already will, and the ones who don't want to will, they'll have a reason not to. But the proportion will be, I think, reasonable with that. Just very quickly, Bregman talks about a survey where they surveyed a couple hundred people and they said, would you trust people in the community with a UBI, that they would spend the money wisely? And almost unanimously, people said, no, I wouldn't. No, they'd just squander it. They'd buy, they'd just squander it. And then they were asked, well, what would you do? Would you use it responsibly? Oh, yes, I'd use it responsibly. I definitely would. Yeah, I definitely would. So people see themselves as doing the right thing, but they don't see other people as doing the right thing. So I think, I think we would see enough people doing the right thing to make it worthwhile. But as I say, the jury's out on that one. I think we just have to have a long national conversation about this to just sort out the details. Next question, how do I see technology being used by small local communities to make them stronger? For example, the share economy and the impact moving forward. Look, I see really great benefits there. I think that as more people are able to, well, for example, if the UBI happened, then those people, well, let me just say, there was a trial done in the Netherlands where a person got, say, €1,000 a month if they did volunteer work, 20 hours a week, or they got €800 a month if they did no volunteer work. And lots of people did the volunteer work and got the extra €200. I mean, it was on a pro rata basis. It wasn't a bad way. So it's a way for people to be paid to do volunteer work, and that would vastly increase the number of people working in the community, doing things in the community that build a really solid, tight-knit community. But it wouldn't just be in the instance of a UBI. I see technology allowing this to happen more broadly. So I'm not seeing too many more questions there, so I'm not sure if we have reached the end. We've probably just got time for another question if somebody's got one. Okay, folks, I thank you so very much for tuning in to this inaugural Griffith lecture, and the first one that we've done streaming, I should say. We've had them before, but they've always been face-to-face. And I hope you've enjoyed it, found it worthwhile, and do stay tuned for the next one, which will be coming along in the not too distant future. So hope everybody stays safe out there, and let's be optimistic about a return to normality sometime soon. Thank you very much.